Here we go. So we're on 27?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Letter
All right.
XXII.
27. Learn your Roman numerals.
I do need to
I guess before we get started, Elijah, do you want to pray for us?
Yeah. Lord, we bless your holy name, Father. I thank you for this day and this time where we come together, Lord, to Lord, build a culture in a way, Lord, and a difference within our own hearts as we share each other's lives and go into readings of people you were, or people you influenced, Lord, and people who followed you. Lord, I pray that we would continue to seek your face, that we would continue to listen for your voice in this time where there is many unknowns and changing things. Lord, I pray that we would trust in you. I pray this in your name. Amen.
Man.
All right. We're about to start with reading today. It's been a few weeks, but we're on letter 27 now. The title of this chapter is "The Time of Temptation and Distress is No Time to Form Resolves." Your excessive distress is like a summer torrent, which must be suffered to run away. Nothing makes any impression upon you, and you think you have the most substantial evidence for the most imaginary states. It is the ordinary result of great suffering. God permits you, notwithstanding your excellent faculties, to be blind to what lies immediately before you, and to think you see clearly what does not exist at all. God will be glorified in your heart, if you will be faithful in yielding to his designs. But nothing would be more injudicious than the forming of resolutions in a state of distress, which is manifestly accompanied by an inability to do anything according to God. When you shall have become calm, then do in a spirit of recollection what you shall perceive to be nearest the will of God respecting you. Return gladly to devotion, simplicity, and the oblivion of self. Commune and listen to God, and be deaf to self. Then do all that is in your heart. For I have no fear that a spirit of that sort will permit you to take any wrong step. But to suppose that we are sane when we are in the very agony of distress and under the influence of a violent temptation of self-love is to ensure our being led astray. Ask any experienced advisor, and he will tell you that you are to make no resolutions until you have re-entered into peace and recollection. You will learn from him that the readiest way to self-deception is to trust ourselves in a state of suffering in which nature is so unreasonable and irritated. You will say that I desire to prevent you doing as you ought, if I forbid you doing it at the moment when you are capable of it. God forbid. I neither desire to permit nor hinder. My only wish is so to advise you that you shall not be found wanting toward God. Now it is as clear as day that you would fall in that respect if you took counsel at the hands of a self-love wounded to the quick and an irritation verging on despair. Would you change anything to gratify your self-love when God does not desire it? God forbid. Wait then until you shall be in a condition to be advised. To enjoy the true advantages of illumination, we must be equally ready for every alternative, and must have nothing which we are not cheerfully disposed at once to sacrifice for his sake. What do you guys think?
I think it's interesting when it's talking about in this letter because it seems pretty relevant to the time we're in right now, where it's I don't know, I do kind of feel like we are in a time of temptation and distress. I think that's something that always goes on in life, but more specifically right now. Because I think there's a lot of things that are uneasy right now, and that I think when things aren't super, where things seem a little unstable, it gives way for like temptation or other things, or for like a falling away. But and even what I was saying, I don't know where that was, but it's when it was talking about even like seeking advising, maybe, or counsel, was it saying after a time of like temptation and distress?
To do what after such a time?
Like seeking, advising or.
Well, I'm seeing in one part it says, ask any experienced advisor and he will tell you that you are to make no resolutions until you have re-entered into peace and recollection. Which is a part of the subject of the letter, which is that you are not to form resolutions or make, I guess you might also say make firm judgments about things, or
Commitments.
commitments, or make consequential decisions when you're, decisions often have to be made whether or not you're in a time of distress, but to not allow there to be anything that solidifies in your heart that has come through an unstable or distressed or even tempted mind and heart.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
There was a part that talks if you took counsel at the hands of your self-love, wounded to the quick. There was that, and then right before it talked about, my only wish is to advise you. I don't know if that's the part that you're talking about.
I don't know. It just reminded me of how kind of like some of our leaders in this time are not. We're kind of in a place of less advising,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of, I don't know. It just seems like it's similar to the place a lot of us are in life right now. And how to know where to put our, how to position our hearts in a place where we can make like the right decisions or resolves. Like it seems like it's a lot more of a testing time. And I think in a time, or many times when you're in distress or temptation, I mean, that can obviously be the work of the enemy, but I think the Lord works in that too. To test like what we really put our faith in, or put our like what we really stand upon in life.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's highlighting kind of one of the many dangers to doing things on our own or operating in a way that is by our own will, I guess, or way of doing things, especially when we're in that place where our flesh is really stirred up and or in a place of temptation or hardship. We kind of resort to our defaults, which obviously that's not good for discernment and decision making. I can even think of Justin was teaching about resolve a couple months ago, and even just what that looks like and what resolve is. It's like, what do you need to resolve to do? That's what it reminded me of. Is it's a lot of the time before you enter into seasons of temptation or distress, you really have to make those resolves before then, or make those commitments, not only obviously not by yourself, but before others and before God, before that time, and to not resort to the defaults we tend to fall into in the midst of hardship. But yeah, it is definitely, it's asking you to question yourself in the way that you make decisions and in the way that you think and even process yourself when you're in that mode. It's very misled. And it even says, wouldn't you do anything to satisfy that self-love, basically, in that mode? So I think discernment through relationship and reaching out to others and really being open and genuine about where you are and what the Lord is leading you through is just so beneficial, because we really are in no place to have any discernment whatsoever when we're in that mode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like what you said about the defaults. That's kind of what I was getting from it too. Obviously, in a time of distress, if we are operating out of our default, our default is bound to be led by our own emotions and the circumstances that we are in. So obviously that's probably not the best path to be walking in. But I think, like you were saying, overall, Fenelon is encouraging that awareness to be more sought out.
A mindfulness.
Yeah, and even more so in a time of distress and temptation, right? Because those kind of defaultish ways can sneak in pretty quickly. Also at the end, when it talks about being ready for every and each alternative and being willing to cheerfully dispose of anything, I thought that was interesting too, because that's a lot, to give up. And it could be very simple, or it could be very difficult, depending on the way that you view it. But yeah,
Reminded me of what we even learned last couple of weeks, even up to the last week we did Justin's class in Lord of the Rings, just with not only watching and waiting, and looking internally
Yeah.
to see, it's a lot of the time it's easy to see you could use the word evil on the outside of the tower, but even to examine what's happening on the inside. And even with, Flotsam and Jetsam, I think that was really encouraging. That's what it reminded me of at the end when it said that, to really have that willingness to let go. And even cheerfully, that's a whole nother... I actually don't even know what it means fully by cheerfully in this context. Because obviously we have a very set way of thinking of it. a lot
Maybe
of the
that's
time.
like a understanding of what we are like doing away with, and even if it's like hard to do it, when we
Yeah.
are doing it, it's cheerful in the sense that we know that it's
Good.
good.
I think that joy comes from a different place rather than from our emotions too, right? It's a different joy, whole different operation.
Mm-hmm.
Might not be appealing to our flesh, but it is a joy to the spirit man.
I think it's important to realize too that when he's talking about the formation of resolve, it's unwise to do so in those times of instability, but that doesn't mean that there is not a resolve that is still carried through such times. The point is that they're not to be formed in such times, but there may have been resolves formed before when you were in a more receptive and mindful place. And what can happen as well in those times of temptation and distress is to reconsider or question those resolves. But to know, I guess the way it's often put is being in your right mind. So what is necessary in order to follow after or abide by this advice that Finland is giving, which is very profound life advice, just as much as it is a spiritual advice. You have to be able to develop that awareness of when you are and are not in your right mind. That's a very sure mark of maturity, because in not doing so, you in many ways still think like a child. And thinking in such a way as in acting upon that way of thinking is described as impetuous. So kind of act before you really think much about the mind and heart in which you're doing a thing, and even further than that, its consequences. And the opposite of that is the good or preferable opposite to that is conscientiousness. So thinking about what you're doing before you do it. It's a kind of healthy caution, right? And an unhealthy opposite to that would be being overly cautious or overthinking things, which we all have a tendency to do. I think if overthinking, if I'm to describe these traits or qualities, whatever you want to call them, in a age correlated way, impetuousness is very childlike. Conscientiousness and being very watchful over the way that you're thinking and the posture of your heart and the consequences of your actions that way of doing things is adult-like, or just you could say mature. But overthinking is interesting because it's kind of in the middle. It's you're learning to be conscientious or to be watchful of your actions, but you have not really fully developed that ability yet. You haven't really acquired the necessary wisdom to practice it in a mature way. And so it's kind of like a teenage quality, you might say. Because or yeah, it's a young person quality. You think a little bit too much about the consequences, or you think a little bit too much about the way that you're thinking about it, and so you actually get caught up in something that actually should be helpful for you. Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so in that way, yourself is a hindrance, but in a different way. It's yourself is not taking full control of you like it would with the impetuous person or the child, where self kind of just runs the show naturally. But it's still, even though you're kind of learning how to detach yourself from yourself, the self, even though it is somewhat detached from you, it still is. It still obscures and warps things in your mind because you're in that process of seeing things apart from it. But it makes things a lot more complex than they really are, which is what overthinking tends to do. So, even being able to enter into this ability that's necessary to practice what Finland is suggesting is itself a process, and takes it takes time and practice that eventually brings the maturity that is needed to realize when you are in a state of distress, and from that point you can know when and when not to form resolves. But I think you guys were touching on it a little bit, but what would be even an example of forming a resolve? Like, what does that mean? Is that something, obviously that's something a little more subtle than in a time of distress or temptation, sitting at a desk and writing out what you firmly believe based off of the emotions and soulish fluctuations that are going on in your inner man. But it's something that we tend to form in our minds. It's maybe a resolve that we're forming in our minds that we're not even all that conscious of, which again is why, like I was saying earlier, it's good to be able to think about how you're thinking and act according to what you perceive there. But what does it really mean to be forming a resolve? It's really important to narrow that down, because that's kind of what the entire letter is about.
I think it's like kind of setting an understanding of how life works and how your life is gonna like function in this kind of, in the sense it's talking about in this chapter. It's kind of like a mindset, like the resolve. It's kind of like a set operation of living. It's gonna decipher how you go about living your life. And I think that can be changed, but once it's set, I think it's pretty hard to undo that. It's definitely something that once it is done, it has to be undone by setting in place a new resolve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what my understanding of that.
I don't know if I'm understanding it correctly, but I was thinking of like even just going back to the foundations, like re-establishing what you already know to be true, and obviously that judgment of knowing what's true and what's not is important too in that, but feel like, yeah, I don't know how to say it, but like just kind of how do you say that, like you're reminding yourself a little bit about what the things that are solid and the things that don't really change, even though you're in a circumstance that will come and go. The things that don't waver, like Elijah was saying, the things that it's the way that life works, basically.
Yeah.
You could think of it as like a, I don't know, I sometimes think of it as like a standard or a commitment of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you're setting a standard. And that could be, I'm not going to do, or I'm going to do this, but I guess that would be more of like a base way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very likely that he was responding to something that the young lady was planning on doing or responding to something in a certain way. And since she reaches out to Finland for counsel, that was basically what Finland was giving her. So he wasn't just offering this general principle that was unrelated to a circumstance that was likely going on with the person he was writing to. So I think that helps you understand that resolve in the way that Finland's putting it probably has more to do, like contextually speaking, with like circumstantial things. So basically how one thinks that things are going to be as a result of a decision that they make. And so it's like it's like someone is prone to like justify their actions. So they don't walk, or they're tired of walking in an uncertainty and even a doubt towards themselves and whether or not their decisions are right or productive. And so they resolve to do something, which means they don't just go about it warily, but they go about it with a set mind and heart. And the only way they're really able to do so is if they justify those actions somehow. Like some people will do so through reason, so this makes sense, or they do it because of practicality, so this is the most practical way to respond to this or proceed in this. Or some people may even go as far as to be misled and intuitively understanding it to be the right thing and then marking it as spirit-led, which that's I think a tendency of religious thinking is to feel, quote unquote, that something is right and then label it as a spirit-led action or decision. And that's not always the way that works. And so people often will follow their description of an action with or they'll start their description of something they decided to do with, I felt led to. Like, you probably hear that pretty often, right? I'm not saying that every time people say that they weren't led, but that's that is itself a kind of
Resolve.
yeah, it's a justification
Mhm.
of an action, and it's that's why Finland is saying that doing that sort of thing in times of distress and temptation, feeling like you have everything figured out in such times is dangerous. Which kind of implies that when you are feeling uncertain about yourself and about the situation, and like you don't have it all figured out, that's actually a
Maybe
better
not,
place to be.
Yeah.
A phrase, I don't think I know I didn't make up this phrase, but I don't remember where it could have come from, but a phrase that I really like is thriving in uncertainty. I think that's a very valuable thing to learn, because a lot in life is uncertain, and I think most things that we encounter, like circumstantially, are like uncertain for a time, even though they are eventually resolved. But there's other things in life that would almost seem to be perpetually uncertain. But learning to appreciate that state of uncertainty and to have like a deeper realization of the Lord's purpose through that state is almost always not just soothing for the soul, but enlightening for the mind and heart, and it makes way for the Spirit to work, because you're not limiting the Spirit through your decisiveness, which comes through patience, and which very often happens in those stressful or tempting times of life. I'm still speaking a lot in generalities, unfortunately, but I think it's suitable because these mentioned times of distress and temptation are they're pretty widespread, or they're pretty prevalent in life. We encounter them large and small. I mean, I guess at the beginning of this discussion we were talking about the current season that we're in. I think it was Elijah that brought that up. And so, yes, it is definitely a very interesting time now. Probably better state as a time of a kind of distress, and looking at it from my own point of view, I'd say that I have fortunately not formed a firm resolve as to what the greater implications of what God is doing in certain people's lives in our midst are. I know that they are major. I know, at least I have like a sense of the magnitude of them, and I don't necessarily know what the timing looks like for when clarity will be brought to those things, but my mind and heart, at least, are very open to whatever the Lord is going to show through what has been happening recently. I think there are several things that have been shown already, but there have been some. Everything has seemed pretty disparate still, so disconnected. I think there will be connections brought about in time, but I think fortunately there are very few, if any of us right now that are thinking in such a way as to lead us to say, oh, well, this means this, and
Presumption.
yeah, this is why this happened, and this is what's going to result from that, and so I'm going to think about it in this mode in which, if anything affects me from the situation, if there's a personal interaction that takes place, then I know exactly how I'm going to deal with it, and I kind of have everything figured out. That's the kind of resolve, I guess, that one might have in response to this quote unquote time of distress. Anyways, if you guys have anything more to add, please go ahead. Otherwise, we'll move on.
I was just thinking of what I said a little bit about the, like reminding yourself of the foundations a little bit. I think it's more than just the reminding part, but it's obviously, what I meant is like being able to like I was saying, understand the foundations and then look for ways to practice those, or like to implement those kind of ways of living in your life. Like that brings resolve when something that you know is real can be put into practice. That's what.
All right. We'll go ahead and move on to 28 then, letter 28. Which is entitled, Who Has Love Has All. I have thought frequently since yesterday on the matters you communicated to me, and I have increasing confidence that God will sustain you. Though you take no great pleasure in religious exercises, you must not neglect to be faithful in them, as far as your health will permit. A convalescent has but little appetite, but he must eat to sustain life. It would be very serviceable to you if you could occasionally have a few minutes of Christian converse with such of your family as you can confide in. And as to the choice, be guided in perfect liberty by your impressions at the moment. That's interesting. It almost seems a little bit contrary to what he was saying in the earlier letter. God does not call you by any lively emotions, and I heartily rejoice at it, if you will but remain faithful. For a fidelity unsustained by delights is far purer and safer from danger than one accompanied by those tender feelings, which may be seated too exclusively in the imagination. A little reading and recollection every day will be the means of insensibly giving you light and strength for all the sacrifices God will require of you. Love him, and I will acquit you of everything else, for everything else will come by love. I do not ask from you a love tender and emotional, but only that your will should lean towards love, and that notwithstanding all the corrupt desires of your heart, you should prefer God before self and the whole world.
It's almost kind of hard to pick something out because it's pretty straightforwardly said already.
Yeah, there are a few things here that would be good to discuss. What do you guys think? What stands out?
It was interesting how we talked about God does not call you to live by any lively emotions. And I hardly rejoice at it if you will but remain faithful. I don't know if that's what if he's touching on love itself as the emotion, but I mean, I even think about like a time we had or 2 days ago on Wednesday night, where obviously a lot of good things are happening, or good things happen in times like that when the Spirit kind of makes himself known and many move in the Spirit. But it's like, even like Dad said at the end of that time, it's more important like in a daily way to be a certain way before the Lord. I don't know if that's what he's saying right there, but I think that's where it's like really the most beneficial, but also pretty difficult to learn how to be in that position before the Lord. And then what he said about it would be very serviceable to you if you could occasionally have a few minutes of Christian converse with such of your family as you can confide in, and as to the choice, be guided in perfect liberty by your impressions at the moment. I don't even really get what that means.
Well, I don't think any of us know what the choice is.
Yeah.
So that's another context-dependent thing. But he's saying in whatever that choice concerns, to be unhindered in responding to or even engaging in that decision or making the decision with whatever I mean it's in a sense saying do what feels right at that time, which putting it that way seems a little off and misleading, because acting according to what feels right is not always the smartest way to make decisions, because and I was also saying it seemed a little bit contradictory to what he was just talking about in the previous letter.
Maybe it's assuming you're coming from the right heart posture in that time of making that decision.
Mm-hmm. But he had also said, where was it in the previous? Yeah, he said in the second paragraph of the previous letter, he said, commune and listen to God and be deaf to self. Then do all that is in your heart, for I have no fear that a spirit of that sort will permit you to take any wrong step.
And maybe
So,
after you're in that place.
there's something Emmanuel used to say about that phrase that's popular in Western that Western sense of the freedom and individuality of self and one's destiny and what it means to be a liberated and free-spirited individual. That the phrase is usually follow your heart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Christians, more conservative Christians have always really criticized that statement as no, actually don't, because it's the heart is deceitful above all things. That's actually I don't remember exactly where that's from. It might be Psalms. Anyways, and I think the phrase is, at least when it's spoken in those settings, it is quite false and misleading. But Emmanuel would say, well, if your heart is a good heart, then there is a kind of directing influence it might have.
Yeah.
Because the transformed heart, a transformed and spiritually informed heart is not one that misleads. It's not one that is deceptive. It doesn't mean that the heart takes the place of the spirit, but it's what receives from the spirit. And the heart is, this is where the discussion can get a little interesting, because it involves the distinguishing of the faculties or the components that make up a man. Like, what's the difference between the heart and the mind, the spirit, and things like that. But like I was saying, it's not something that replaces the spirit. It's something that is fully given to the Father. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, or whatever order of words are used there. I don't remember the exact words. But that's the true heart that can be that which leads a person. I almost, just as the heart is physically what gives impetus to the body and its function, I think the heart in the figurative sense does the same for the inner man, or for the soul. That's still a thing somewhat unclear to me as to what delineates the soul from the heart. I think that would end up just being another conversation about words rather than this actual truth about like that inner reality or that inner person. But anyways, you were talking about, remind me
What?
what we were responding to.
Oh, I was
that you
just.
had mentioned.
I think you already answered it. I was just talking about, like, what he was talking about, talking with your like family.
Mm-hmm.
I think you answered that, because like that choice kind of comes from, or I think we can make.
Oh yeah, you had asked what was meant by being guided in perfect liberty by your impressions at the moment.
Yeah. So and then we kind of were saying that was depending on your heart posture, if like.
To be validated by a spiritual counselor like Fenelon, in that also clears one's conscience in responding to a situation or making a choice in that way. Because now you don't feel like you're doing it according to your own volition merely, but that you have been affirmed by and enabled by someone that you know is wiser than you. And as a result, it's not, as he was talking about in the former chapter, this resolve made in a time of confusion or distress or temptation, but something done that has been informed by a trusted counsel, and from a greater perspective, led by a higher purpose that maybe even is beyond the situational need. Anyways, what else do you guys see or think about it?
You kind of also mentioned a little bit about some confusion between like the actual emotion of love, because I know that it alludes to it a lot, and even talks about leaning your will toward love as like a physical object almost. So just thinking about that a little bit. Obviously, I think love represents something more than just that emotion. Is kind of like
Yeah, he was saying that near the end of this
Yeah.
letter. So what does it really mean then? What do you think?
I think the love is representative of God in many ways. His being, his like being within, or like being, yeah, taking upon that same pattern that he had shown us when he came to earth. I'm still thinking about it too.
I'm even reminded of what Tim reminded us of on Wednesday night, which is, following the Spirit is not an emotion. Yielding to the Spirit and allowing Him to use you is not something that your emotions, you don't usually feel right about it. And it's not this, oh yeah, I'm feeling it today, I think I'm gonna, engage or participate. It is an act of the will. And I think that's what this is talking about here. Is even what we perceive as affection is an emotion. And what even goes beyond our feelings. And I don't know, part of it's comforting in a way, because your feelings usually throw you all over the place, especially in a time like that spiritually. And when you take that personally, as in if something's wrong with you, it really, really messes you up. But what I've just been reminding myself is that feelings really are misleading, and even in that moment that they don't matter, and that you have to push beyond that feeling of, I want to go home, or, I'm not good enough for this, or whatever you're feeling, or this is just weird, or whatever, is that those things are misleading, they don't matter, and that what does matter is your will and your desire to be used by God. And as this puts, to lean into his love and his way. It's not a feeling, and in fact, a lot of the time it will feel wrong, and everything within your body will want to go against it. But you can push through those things. I think a lot of us had to do on Wednesday night. I know for sure I did, but...
Yeah, that's exactly right. It being an issue of the will. And he gives a little picture of what that looks like, and what he says at the very end there, that notwithstanding all the corrupt desires of your heart, so there's the heart again, which is deceitful and wayward, as we said, like naturally. You should prefer God before self and the whole world. So it's not, like Isaac's saying, it's not, love is not responding to something according to this strong feeling that one has and the grander scheme of things, but it's despite these natural inclinations that we have. Because when he says corrupt desires, that does not mean that, in fact, I think for most people that are even concerned about this stuff or this particular issue, they're not dealing with very bad or base desires, but any desire that would lead away from a walking in the calling on one's life by God, that can be considered a corrupt desire because it comes from another source. And so it's interesting how these things, there's some things about this that are constant, whether or not you're zoomed out or in, like zoomed into a particular circumstance and a smaller decision, or zoomed out into where the general trajectory of your life is going, and how some things do change depending on whether or not you're dealing with a specific scenario or you're considering the direction of your life at large. So I would say that we can kind of see that change even in this letter with the advice he gives near the beginning, saying to be guided in perfect liberty by your impressions at the moment, but at the end saying, notwithstanding all the corrupt desires of your heart, you should prefer God before self and the whole world. Now, I think it is pretty evident that there's not actually a contradiction there. There's a different way of responding to what you're looking at, which I think in the first case is the matter at hand, right? Which we don't really know anything about what's going on with the person. But then at the end there's kind of a zooming out into the results of not just a specific decision or a few decisions, but a pattern of decisions, a way that decisions are made. And he's saying with a view concerning the patterns of decision, the heart that is manifest in that pattern or in the way that they're made, to make sure that there is an evidence or a real motivation of loving God as being that which forms those patterns of making decisions that are the basis of the ways we make them. And if that's the case, then in acting in true love towards God, and you could extend it by saying the way that we love others, which I think is informed by the way that we love God, then those decisions are not going to be made by emotion, because that's not what love is. At least the love that he's talking about here. They're made by a willingness to lean towards that which is not of the selfish nature or the corrupt desires of the heart, as he's saying here. Which is, again, this is why at the very end he kind of zooms out a little bit. It's a prioritizing of God before self. So hopefully that's making sense.
What?
You guys are. You're listening. So I talk, but I also want feedback. That's what I'm saying. I am repeating myself, but I'm doing that purposefully. Yeah. I'm just approaching the same thing from different angles. Do you guys have anything else?
I think what you touched on with our love for God being first and letting that actually be the way that forms the way we make our decisions is very important. And that is what yielding to the Father and yielding the things in your life and even your own personal desires and wants before the Father looks like, is continually putting Him above yourself. I think that that's something that the Lord is definitely working on within each one of us. And even how we even do that in the mundane or in the day-to-day is just something I've been thinking about a lot. Because a lot of the time it's hard to see how to do that practically per se, especially when you think of it more in doing and actions rather than a heart posture or a mindset. But I guess the way that you would measure to even see if you were doing that is based on your actions, because there's no real other way that you could measure it. So I've just been thinking about that a lot, but I think that that's definitely something the Lord has been bringing up, for sure.
Yeah, like you were saying, it's in many ways this second chapter like a answer to the first one, and seems like it could, like that could be the answer to the right, correct heart posture in a time of distress, even. Having your eyes fixed toward God, and like you were saying, through that, through loving Him, then that will be kind of the way that, or that is what informs your decisions and the way that you make them and stuff. It's pretty big.
Why don't we do one more chapter then? Or letter. This is 39. Weakness preferable to strength, in practice better than knowledge. I am told, my dear child in the Lord, and our Lord, that you are suffering from sickness. I suffer with you, for I love you dearly. But I cannot but kiss the hand that smites you, and I pray you to kiss it lovingly with me. You have heretofore abused your health and the pleasures derived from it. This weakness and its attendant pains are the natural consequence of such a course. I pray God only that He may depress your spirit even more than your body. And while He comforts the latter according to your need, that He may entirely vanquish the former. Oh, how strong we are when we begin to perceive that we are but weakness and infirmity. Then we are ever ready to believe that we are mistaken, and to correct ourselves while confessing it. Our minds are ever open to the illumination of others. Then we are authoritative in nothing, and say the most decided things with simplicity and deference for others. Then we do not object to be judged, and submit without hesitation to the censure of the first comer. At the same time, we judge no one without absolute necessity. We speak only to those who desire it, mentioning the imperfections we seem to have discovered, without dogmatism, and rather to gratify their wishes than from a desire to be believed or create a reputation for wisdom. I pray God that He may keep you faithful to His grace, and that He who hath begun a good work in you will perform it to the day of Jesus Christ. We must bear with ourselves with patience and without flattery, and remain in unceasing subjection to every means of overcoming our thoughts and inward repugnances. We shall thus become more pliable to the impressions of grace and the practice of the gospel. But let this work be done quietly and peacefully, and let it not be entered upon too eagerly, as though it could be accomplished in a single day. Let us reason little, but do much. If we are not careful, the acquisition of knowledge will so occupy this life that we shall need another to reduce our acquirements into practice. We are in danger of believing ourselves advanced toward perfection in proportion to our knowledge of the way. But all our beautiful theories, far from assisting in the death of self, only serve to nourish the life of Adam in us by a secret delight and confidence of our illumination. Be quit then of all trust in your own power and in your own knowledge of the way, and you will make a great stride towards perfection. Humility and self-distrust with a frank ingenuousness are fundamental virtues for you. In that sentence where he says, we are in danger of believing ourselves advance towards perfection in proportion to our knowledge, there's a comment by the editor. This seems one of the most common, as well as most serious mistakes to which spiritual persons are liable. God gives the knowledge and desires us to put it in practice. But the moment we see it, we are so carried away with delight that we forget that there is anything else to be done. Whereas we have comparatively slender reason to rejoice until it is put in vital operation in the life. Sorry, vital. I don't know if I said viral or not. Not viral. In vital operation in the life. Ye see, says the Savior, but do not perceive. Ye hear, but do not understand. Food, lying undigested in the stomach, is not only of no service to the body, but if not removed, it will become a serious injury. It is only when it is assimilated and mingled with the blood, and when it appears by its good effects in our hands, feet, head, and trunk, that it can be said to have become our own. To have a divine truth in the intellect is indeed matter of thanksgiving, but it will avail only to our condemnation if it be not also loved in the heart and acted in the life. Let us remember that it is not the knowledge of the way that God desires in us, but the practice of it. Not light, but love. For though I understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and have not charity, I am nothing. That's from 1 Corinthians 13, verse 2. This is a pretty big topic. What do you guys think?
I think it's so true. And when he's speaking about even modern people who struggle with this a lot, I think it's something that can be, or that is most of the time not even understood, that that's what they're doing, that they're not actually living it out. You know, it's the first, like, the perception of even understanding that that you're not acting it out, that you're just enjoying the pleasure of the way that it feels or whatever it may be. I think that's a big hinderer of that, like he says.
I think it's pretty relevant to what we were talking about last week in the
Yeah, I was just thinking that too.
illumination of knowledge and that ever, growing desire for knowledge that we have, especially in relation to self improvement or things of that nature. And it's, we really get caught up on those things so much to the point where we're not even bringing those things into practice or even trying to. But that's what I think is so beautiful when the Lord really tests us by taking that away and by almost, think of it as like murking up the waters in a way. We can't see as clearly as we want to. We aren't as confident in ourselves as we want to be. And we don't have that crutch that, that we seek, which is that validation.
I was mentioning what it said about let us reason little but do much. If we are not careful, the acquisition of knowledge will so occupy this life that we shall need another to reduce our acquirements into practice. Yeah, just like I think that goes in line with what we were talking about last week too. That there is a point where seeking knowledge is not a bad thing, but I think there's a balance to all of that, where the knowledge we gain is put into practice, or that it isn't just focused on having that knowledge. Just thought that was similar to what you're talking about. There's something else here. Just like what we were just reading the note on, we are in danger of believing ourselves advanced towards perfection in proportion to our knowledge of the way. But all of our beautiful theories, far from assisting in the death of self, only serve to nourish the life of Adam in us by a secret delight and confidence in our illumination. He uses too many big words. You can't really wrap it up in your head, but it's like, in essence, there's just Adam within us, that kind of way that I think, because Adam wanted that knowledge from that fruit. I think it's maybe pointing out a type of independence we seek, which is, it's breaking away from the Lord. And it's also like cutting off that relationship the Lord wishes to have with us. And kind of seeking that by our own means. Secret delight and confidence. Maybe that secret delight and confidence in our own illumination is that kind of place where we think we are in control of the way we go about attaining knowledge for ourselves, and like kind of being our own human, which is kind of the fall that Adam made, which was breaking away from the relationship of the Father. Also kind of the need for the Father, which is basically when he ate that fruit, it's kind of like, I don't need you because I can have this fruit and understand myself. And God obviously did that on purpose because he wanted Adam to realize his need for the Father. And I think we all still struggle with our need for the Lord and the relationship with the Lord. Because we can definitely just go and do our own life and gain our own knowledge. It's very possible, but it's only leads to destruction in the end, and it's also not what God intended. He intended to have that relationship with his sons, to give them that knowledge and give them that relationship. And then it's again, it's not all about having knowledge. God doesn't just want us to have it. He wants us to serve a purpose. And I think part of that is gaining some wisdom and knowledge, but yeah.
Yeah, like what the title says. Weakness preferable to strength. It reminds me of something that the Lord has revealed to my mom just in relation to pain and suffering. Huh?
I was kind of thinking a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, just how that is, especially in her life, how the Lord has really prepared her and really set her in the right place for what He has, not only for her, but for this community. And that is, yeah, it's a preparing, is what that really is, among other things. But it just really stuck out to me that when the Lord puts us in that place of weakness, and I even, especially in her case, where it's almost just feels hopeless in a way, He has a purpose in that, and it's a revealing of what that purpose is. And I can't really speak of being in that place, per se, but that's what it reminded me of, is even just being thankful when the Lord puts us in that place, just because of, what He does through it. And even in relation to, practice better than knowledge. Even in that place of strength, per se, where we feel like we have this knowledge and we have it figured out, like we were talking about earlier. It's very easy to get caught up on that idea of knowledge, that delight. Because it's perceivable, it feeds that desire that we have for knowledge. And we lose the need to put it into practice. And I think that there's a relation there with that pain and suffering and the practice. But I'm still trying to work that out.
Yeah, there's a balance, obviously, between appreciating the place in your soul and spirit that you're brought to through pain and suffering, and also having to bear that pain and suffering, because just when we think of your mom, obviously that's a lot of it, if not most of it, seems to those of us who observe very unbearable, although she, as we also observe very clearly, she bears it very well. I bet she would even say that she doesn't bear as well as she could, but there's many things about it that we can't even fathom. So to see even how she does it is also incomprehensible. But I'm saying that because there is a part of it that just, I think, kind of like you were saying, doesn't make sense, or as you put it, I think just seems hopeless, because to hope in that sense would be to expect things to improve and get better, and it seems hopeless because it doesn't ever seem like they will get better, because things keep happening, they're recurring, they seem endless. So that's the part that I'm talking about that's hard to bear, because that's the balance, is you realize that the Lord brings you to a very receptive and listening and open place, before God through that pain and suffering, but the pain and suffering is still there. It's not like once you're able to receive or even have received, it will go away. That's the part that's hard to understand. It's like this. There's no resolve in that, and like I guess the real issue of that lack of resolve is what do you do from here?
Yeah.
And like many options come up. Like, do I just kind of treat it as, well, this is the way things are going to be. Here we are again, by the way, in a time of distress. So, do we or do we not, or should we not form resolves? But that's our tendency, regardless of the way that you think. There's always a tendency to form a resolve, like, well, this is just the way things are going to be, or I'm just going to react to this in a discontented way or an emotional way, and so I'm just going to start to break apart because I just can't take it anymore. Or I've reached a place of desperation, so now I'm going to begin to seek for solutions that are kind of against my conscience. Just there's many different paths it could go down. Or, like we were talking about a little bit ago, you learn to thrive in the uncertainty of it by not forming any resolve in the moment of distress. So maybe your resolve is to not form a resolve. I think he just tried to call me, so I guess you are
Who was that?
able to.